I'll be ready. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is our very first Primary Care Commissioning Committee as part of the Greater Manchester Integrated Care Board. We are meeting today as an Oldham group for the very first time in public. It feels quite good to finally get this meeting up and running after a fair bit of time and energy, effort and preparation. I just want to quickly go round the room so we all know who each other are. Some new faces in all of this. So my name is Mike Barker. I am the place lead for Oldham locality as part of the Greater Manchester ICB. I'll start with you, Nicola.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicola Hepburn. I'm the Director of Delivery and Transformation, GMICS, Oldham locality.
Kate.
Hi, Kate Bigden, NHS GM, Locality Finance Lead for Oldham.
Marion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Marion Colohan, Head of Primary Care, NHS GM, Oldham locality.
Catherine.
Hi, Kath Madison, Head of Complex Care and Personalisation, Oldham ICB.
Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Stevenson, Consultant in Public Health, and I'm deputising for Katrina, Director of Public Health today.
Brilliant, thank you. And Debs.
Hi, my name's Deb Waterhouse. I'm the Deputy Team Leader, Oldham ICB. I'm here to take the minutes of the meeting.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And you're all very welcome today. Deb, have we had any apologies today from anybody?
Yeah, we've got Erin Portsmouth, Director of Corporate Affairs. We've got Katrina Stevens, Director of Public Health, but we've got Charlotte with us today representing, and we've got Dr. John Patterson, Associate Medical Director.
Brilliant. And just for the minutes, Erin officially has a new job title today, Director of Strategy and Development or something of that nature. We'll make sure it's reflected properly in the minutes. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody needs to make today before we start the meeting formally? Brilliant. I'll take that as, oh, Nicola.
So just to say, the conflict of interest that's noted in the minutes in the papers, it's actually my sibling no longer works for primary care but does work within the quality team, so that just needs to be amended. Debs, I'll make sure you get the paperwork. It's just for the record. Thanks.
Okay, no worries, thank you. Right, I'm going to move us on to the next agenda item, and this is a little bit unusual. I wouldn't normally give a report in this meeting, but I'm doing it for Erin today while she's covering another meeting for us. When it comes to sort of governance parts of where we've got with the development of the system, I just need to cover off delegations to the committee as a verbal item to start with. Everyone in this group will recall that when the clinical commissioning group closed down, it used to operate a primary care commissioning committee, and as part of the new arrangements the plan was to retain a primary care commissioning committee because it will be a local responsibility to make sure that it has the right level of primary care support and infrastructure in place to deliver GP services. In order for that to happen, Greater Manchester Integrated Care Board has to formally delegate powers and responsibilities into our locality for the locality to be able to pick them up. In this case, these delegations do not fall exclusively to me as the place lead and the senior responsible director. They fall to this committee collectively to operate in a very particular way. And it is my understanding that whilst NHS England delegates the responsibility of the commissioning of primary care overall for the whole of Greater Manchester to the Greater Manchester Integrated Care Board, it has chosen to onwardly delegate responsibility for the commission of primary care in Oldham to Oldham's Primary Care Commissioning Committee. In technical terms, the GM Primary Care Commissioning Committee is subsequently delegating certain commissioning decisions in relation to primary medical services to this place-based Primary Care Commissioning Committee. There is no delegation at all yet confirmed for any further delegations beyond primary care. So in other words, there is no delegation for pharmaceutical services or dentistry or any of that kind of wider array of primary care. They are being retained at the Greater Manchester level. I think whilst we're in public, I think I'd like to say I'd rather hope at some point in time there is a decision to further delegate those wider responsibilities so we can join the whole of that picture up. But for now, let's get used to kind of operating with the delegations that we've got, being effective with those delegations, and we of course have a fairly significant agenda in front of us, most of which I'm pretty sure will be at least trailed and covered in part on the paper which Marion's put forward today. So that was my little introduction to that particular item. Is everybody clear and understanding of what that means and how that's needed to work? It's all documented in the scheme of delegation and reservation that we have on our board. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Deb. I'm going to move on to item 4 then, terms of reference. And again, this is one of Erin's papers, so excuse me for kind of whizzing through this. But within the packs today, you will see a terms of reference for this committee that broadly follow the delegations that have been passed down to us and the roles and responsibilities that have been passed down to us in locality. These terms of reference are based on a template provided by the Greater Manchester Primary Care Commissioning Committee in order for us to be able to set up our place-based committee, and they are here today for us to formally adopt and accept as part of that process. There are some elements within the terms of reference where we've marked them up for areas of membership in broader to the relation wider remit of primary care. I think it's probably important that we caveat that with we still have not had the formal delegations for those things. However, it will be mine and Erin's judgment at this point that we suitably build in flexibility to add those later downstream, which means we'll have to bring the terms of reference back should that be the case. The purpose and the focus for this place committee currently is purely around technical decision making in relation to individual practices, in relation to the overview of service quality, in relation to local plans, and in relation to local agreements that will input to the wider GM work. We are purposely declaring from the start that our intention is to structure these meetings in such a way where there is a large majority of items that are considered as what we would describe as open facing part 1 meetings. That would allow a full and thorough, frank conversation about things like the performance of primary care in Oldham. But we also intend to operate a private part of this meeting as a part 2 item where there are items of commercial or sensitive nature that need to be discussed as part of a development process. Typically that might include the letting of a new contract, for example, where we're looking to go to the market for tender and we don't want any preferential interest to be given to anybody by giving preferential knowledge, and we will continue to run the meeting that way. It will be our very much expressed view that there will be limited amount of items in any part 2 meeting. The majority of it will happen in part 1. In terms of quorum for this meeting, it's listed in the terms of reference. It's quite clearly listed as a minimum of 5 voting members, including the chair or vice chair, someone from commissioning, quality, finance managers, and someone with responsibility for primary care. All of those people are represented equally and ably in this room today. I very much welcome Charlotte's arrival in this meeting today. It feels like such a long time that we've, as an NHS, had a public health consultant working with us. I remember those days 12 or 13 years ago. It's good to see it back around the table. I look forward to the value that you and Katrina will no doubt add to this committee. And today the terms of reference are put forward for us to accept, adopt and use as the basis by which we move this committee forward until such time we choose to review them. Are people happy to accept them, or are there questions that people would like some clarity on before we move forward? Brilliant. I'll take that as a yes. Marion, at this point, I'm gratefully handing the baton across to you.
Thank you, Chair. The first paper that I'm going to be speaking to today is around the assurance and quality of general practice in Oldham. This paper covers 2 main areas, and those are the results of the inspections of the Care Quality Commission, the independent regulator of health and social care in England, and also information around our schedule of practice assurance visits carried out by the Oldham locality to assure ourselves of compliance around the GP contract and any additional services provided by those practices. I'll start by speaking to the CQC inspections. Due to the numerous lockdowns and the pandemic, there has been somewhat of a lull in CQC inspections. However, they have restarted in earnest during 2022. And so far this year, there have been 15 CQC inspection reports published about Oldham practices. And we have a few more that are pending as the inspection has been carried out, but the report is yet to be published. Of the 15 published reports today, 10 of our practices have received an overall rating of good, and 5 of our practices have received an overall rating of requires improvement. Not all of those inspections are detailed in this report, as many of them have been to previous primary care commissioning committees under Oldham CCG. So we are today discussing and looking at the most recently published ones. There is a lot of detail in the paper. I won't go through it all in depth. However, I would like to highlight some of the key findings for each of those practices. So Dr. Danson's practice was inspected and retained its overall rating of good. The CQC highlighted outstanding areas of practice in relation to their access and their adaptations to the special needs of patients registered in the locality. Oldham Medical Practice was also inspected and retained their rating of good. They were praised for their good relationships with the patients and the very patient-centred care that they delivered. Jarvis Medical Practice has been inspected and given an overall rating of good. The CQC at Jarvis highlighted an area of outstanding practice in relation to the care and support that they provided to patients on the end of life pathway and bereaved families. Reflecting on Jarvis, as some members of the committee will be aware, this was sadly a contract where the previous provider had their contract terminated, and our caretaking provider has done a great deal here to improve the quality of the care and the safety for patients to result in that good rating with areas of outstanding practice. Lindley Medical Practice has been inspected and retained its overall rating of good. The CQC here highlighted areas of outstanding practice in respect of their care of refugees and of their homeless population. Dr. Perkins' practice, again, retained its rating of good, highlighted by the CQC, very high quality patient-centred care. And Royston and Crompton Family Practice, also very recently inspected and have got an overall and retained an overall rating of good. Royston and Crompton Family Practice went through some challenges in respect of access last year. They've really overhauled their telephony system. They've really overhauled their operational systems and how their staff work, and that was reflected back in the narrative of the report, in that the CQC were impressed with those roles and responsibilities. I'll just pause for breath. So, moving on to some of our practices who have been rated requires improvement. So firstly, Block Lane have received an overall rating of requires improvement. This was a few months ago now, and a primary care improvement forum to discuss the RI rating has already been held with the practice. An action plan is in place, and we are satisfied with how they are progressing that. This is a practice who has recently gone through a lot of partnership changes. There is a new team in place at the practice, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of the issues that they are dealing with currently are legacy issues that they have inherited from the previous contract holders. However, I do believe that they now have a good team in place to rectify that. They are increasing their staffing levels, and you know, we're satisfied with the progress that they are making. We will continue, of course, to stay in regular contact with Block Lane. We have had in November 3 CQC inspection reports published that were all RI overall. The first one is Royton Medical Practice, who also received inadequate in the well-led domain. However, they did get good for caring and for responsive. They now are in a process of having to respond to the Care Quality Commission in respect of the notices that have been put on their registration. And we, as the Oldham locality responsible for managing the contract, have issued them with a contract compliance plan. We will be meeting with the practice on the 12th of December to go through their initial responses to that. And we will continue to meet with Royton Medical Practice on a regular basis until such a point we are satisfied that all the issues highlighted in the report and indeed with the contract compliance plan have been addressed. Similarly, Medlock Medical Practice has had a requires improvement report published this month. The compliance plan will be sent shortly, and again we will be instigating exactly the same process with Medlock Medical Practice of a series of regular conversations with them, issuing them with detailed action plans and ensuring that they work hard over the next 12 months to try and improve upon that rating. And then finally, the Lees Medical Practice has only just been published at the end of last week. It requires improvement overall, and it requires improvement in all 5 areas that the CQC inspects. Just to make the committee aware that we, as the Commissioner, only see these reports at the point of publication as well. So we are in very early stages of that process with Lees Medical Practice. There has been initial conversation with them about the concerns in the report, and the compliance plan is currently being drafted. I think, as with all practices that are rated requires improvement is a very recoverable position, and a lot now will depend on how those practices engage and respond to the issues that have been highlighted. But we will be working extremely closely with all of them. The report details 2 pending publications, Oak Gables and Pennine. Oak Gables was actually published this morning, and I'm really happy to say that they are good overall and have retained their good rating. So it is now just Pennine that we await the publication of. However, I would expect there to be more CQC inspections by the end of this financial year.
Okay, thank you, Marion. I'm smiling roundly at the Oak Gables thing. The fire alarm go off in the practice there this morning, causing quite a lot of delays for people. Was
Yes.
that the same practice? It was, I think.
It is. They've had an incident this morning, yes. Yeah. However, they've managed it well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Are there any questions for Marion? I definitely have a few. Marion, just kind of talk the committee through, once a CQC has come in, investigated, published its report, the practice then has an obligation to respond back to the CQC with an action plan where it needs to. What sanctions and processes and abilities that we have to make sure that as the contract holders, we're satisfied they're fulfilling those obligations.
Okay, Mike. So there's essentially two parallel processes that run now. So the CQC, as the independent regulator, have to be satisfied now that the practice are compliant with their regulations, yeah, and therefore they will respond directly to the CQC. And in Royton's case, because one of the areas was rated inadequate, it's likely that they will be back at the practice within 3 rather than 6 months, although they will definitely return within 6 months. If the CQC are unhappy with any of the responses that they receive, and indeed if they are completely satisfied with the responses they receive back from the practice, they will inform us, okay? In respect of the contract compliance and the compliance plan that now gets issued, what we have done in conjunction with NHS England's staff is map those regulation breaches against the GP core contract and issued a contractual remedial action plan that the practice also now has to satisfy. There are a lot of parallels between the two, however, they are two distinct processes, and every provider has to satisfy both the CQC regulations and the requirements of the contract. So that is the process that will be going on. In respect of our timescales, I suppose we have more freedom than the CQC to set our own. So our intention with these practices is to stay in very close contact with them, at least for the next 12 months or until such a point that we're satisfied that everything has been rectified.
Okay, that's really helpful. And in terms of Royton Medical Practice in particular, I think what I just heard you say is that we're progressing to a remedial contract plan, turnaround plan with them. If they fail to turn things around in an appropriate way, then that's a significant breach of their contract, which we can then legally do something about quite forcibly. That's quite important, I think, for people to hear. It's by no means actually the worst performing out of any of these practices, though. There are other inspections that were really significantly worse, I would suggest, than Royton Medical. I guess what I'm also interested in is the kind of juxtaposition between the Royton and Crompton family practice, which has got a 14,000 list, is a massive, massive practice, has done an awful lot of work to significantly improve its operations over the past 12 months, but still there's a lot of press noise and a lot of public interest about people's ability to see a GP. How does that square with a rating of good?
I think the CQC regulations are not always the full picture, and I think that's why we have our own quality assurance programme in place as well, so we can continue to explore and progress these themes with practices. In respect to the Royton and Crompton family practice, they were genuinely struggling to recruit last year. However, they have now managed to increase their staffing levels. And I think in a broader context, Mike, some of this falls within the national context of, the shortage of GPs and nurses that England is currently experiencing, and the reality of that for Oldham, in respect of whole-time equivalents, we have the same number of GPs in Oldham roughly as we had around 5 years ago, but patient list sizes have increased, the workload has increased, and the demand has increased. So we've got this stagnation in respect of total numbers of the workforce, but many increased demands upon them. And I don't think that the issues that Royston and Crompton family practice face are necessarily unique. It doesn't necessarily mean that care is unsafe at the practice. but I do think that, like many other practices, they still have some work to do around improving access further where they can and communications with patients.
And then the last question from me, really, I've read quite a few of these reports over the past couple of weeks, really, certainly as they've come out, and there's one thing I'm sort of struck by, really, is general practice. If you imagine it stood in the middle of a circle, it kind of faces one way and it's to the regulator and the commission, and it faces the other way to the patient, and never are those two things the same. The regulator and the commissioners are never really the same interface as the patient, ever. When I read a lot of these reports, it kind of feels to me like most of these issues that have been found, albeit I think are important and significant and do require attention, most of them appear to be less about patient-facing service delivery and much more about regulatory compliance. Would that be a fair assumption?
I think there are elements certainly around that many of the issues that the CQC have found are around human resources, around good governance, around operational systems and processes. I think there are some issues that have been highlighted in some of the reports, and this is a theme, I think, in Royton Lees and Blott Lane, where the CQC have found issues around prescribing and medication reviews, and there are issues where there could be a direct impact on patient care. So I think it is safe to say that there is a lot of governance issues in here as well, but equally there are elements that could have impacted directly on patient care. And I think that will lead to an RI rating.
Yeah, and I suppose finally for me, presumably then the contractual mechanisms that we're putting in place and on top of them will insist on putting the most important things right in the practice first, not the least important things first. In other words, they can't just fix this by doing the easy things. They have to do the really hard things and do it in a time frame by which we're comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Nicola.
And it is a process. And as I said earlier, a lot now depends on how a provider chooses to engage with that process and recognises the steps that they need to take to rectify the situation.
Brilliant, thank you. Nicola.
So 2 points. The point you make about the two different parts of how we support practices, the CQC element and the quality assurance programme that we work with practices with, it is really key because they both complement each other. One is around the governance and the maintenance of a practice and the legalities around it, as well as patient safety. Very much our quality assurance management improvement programme works with patient safety, patient access, and how do we drive forward the quality and the improvement. Both of those complement each other, and so you were right to ask that question, Mike. I think where we need to be able to demonstrate and support practices is, as a reminder to this committee, is the work that we do and the policy that we work to in the Oldham locality has driven extreme brilliance and good success over the last 18 months, including pre and post pandemic, the work that we've done with practices that have been in a far more concerning position than some of these that we're faced with today. And actually those that work with us in the GP Excellence scheme, actually we do drive up the quality for patients, and I think that is important for us to know in the committee. And again, Charlotte, this is why it's really important to have you, Katrina, and your colleagues around the table, because this is very much around, and then my first point why I raised my hand is around access. Our population has changed the way in which they require access and the way they see they are able to gain access, and actually we're not going to combat and improve the situation if we don't work together as a system. And that's why it is key that we have a locality primary care commissioning committee for us to be able to pull this system together to start to drive those improvements. So again, it was just your earlier point, Mike, and the question around access at Royton specifically. is despite the improvements were made on a baseline pre-pandemic. The baseline now is very different, and actually the work we need to do is start to work with the population whilst we start to work around estates, while we work around workforce, and actually how do we get out to our population and inform that there are different ways you don't have to physically be seen by a GP or by a clinician within the practice. And that's the challenge that we all face around how do we change our population, support our population, and how do we change access within primary care from traditional practices, because this isn't just about population and the needs, it's about how we serve our contracts and how do we support our practice to move forward. So this is something that I think the committee needs to keep on the agenda. It's something that we will keep talking about politically and publicly around access, because there is another item on the agenda around this specifically. But I think in relation to how we work with CQC, I think it's really important that we start to look at this in the round rather than just as numbers and access from telephone appointments. Thanks.
That's really helpful. I think I was quite struck yesterday. I was doing a bit of work, and it's quite impressive to think that we've got the same number of GPs than we had 5 years ago. I'm interested in where the government commitment is for the 6,000 extra GPs. They're not really materialised anywhere soon in Oldham by the looks of things. But for the first time ever, we're at practically 110,000 GP appointments per month. That's more than at any point in time, as far as I can recall. And yet we still have issues of people not being able to see their GP face to face in the timeline by which they would expect it. I think there's something quite important. We need to see that kind of data here more frequently as we go forward. I certainly came into the NHS where things like see your GP within 24 hours was a national government target. It's now 2 weeks, as far as I can recall. So there are things I think we've got to get serious about. What do we expect? What do our population expect? How do we kind of match that with national priority and contractual obligations of practices? And then there is something which we're in danger of overlooking a little bit. Appendix 1 of Marion's report. Certainly 4 years ago, when I arrived, Nicola arrived, Marion arrived, that picture was horrendous. It was full of reds. The fact that it's like mainly green with one red on one thing is nothing short of a marvellous achievement from all of you folks, Marion, Nicola, team, all around you. We should be really proud of that. The question now is, how do we kind of get it all green? Sadly, my suspicion is we're never going to, because the inspection regime is getting tougher and tougher and tougher, and people are getting busier and busier and busier. So this whole concept of we've got to put as much support as we can in to get these practices into a good space by helping and nurturing and encouraging and growing, calling out and challenging where we need to call out, and being quite tough where we need to be tough. I think has got to be a feature of how we operate going forward as a group and as a committee. It's particularly poignant today to see this committee work in a different way. I think the dynamics of this group will change. There'll be less conflicts of interest and more directness, I think, but we are going to have to see much more data, I think, as we come through, and we need to kind of start to get across to the public a really clear picture of what's going on in primary care, because of those 110,000 appointments per month in I think it was September's last figures I saw, 70% of them were face to face and on the day. So, quite a significant amount of activities going through primary care in all of this. So really good report, Marion. Should be really pleased. I really fully expect us to be sat here again next time we meet with more of an outcome of what's gone on after the 12th of December meeting with Royton Medical Practice. I think it's also pretty worrying to hear the picture in Leeds. That sounds significantly worse than the Royton picture, but as you say, it's not in special measures. It's not been rated in it's been rated as needs to do better. If it was in school, the homework would say needs to do better next time. And we need to make sure that all of our practices are in a place of feeling supported to be able to do better, but being challenged where actually we think we've got a problem contractually with it. So brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next item, which is focus, funnily enough, on access and enhanced access in particular. I'm taking it's going to be you again, Marion, this one.
This will be me again. Thank you, Mike. On the 1st of October 2022, there was a change in how enhanced access was is delivered, and this is a change in the national contract, so this applies to all of England. Prior to the 1st of October, every general practice could choose under a additional service to provide appointments out of core GP hours, which are 8 a.m. till 6:30 p.m. And the majority of practices in Oldham did choose to take part in that scheme and provide some appointments in the evenings and at weekends based around the population need. And then there was also a CCG and then a locality commissioned 7-day access service. From the 1st of October, those two schemes ceased, and essentially both schemes were brought together under one enhanced access scheme, which is now delivered by primary care networks. In Oldham, we have 5 primary care networks, and I'm very happy to tell the committee that they all went live on the 1st of October as scheduled with their new enhanced access services. In respect of how that is being provided across Oldham, 2 of our primary care networks, North and East, are fully subcontracting the delivery to IGP Care Limited. 2 of our primary care networks, West and South, are partially delivering the appointments themselves through their GP practices and partially subcontracting to IGP Care Limited. And our central primary care network are fully subcontracting the service to GoTo Limited. Therefore, one of the risks in this change was that we went from having one Oldham 7-day access service to potentially 5 different models of delivery across the locality, which is of course a change for patients and a change in how they access services. And it could have led to some inequality. It's very early days, however, based on the October activity, it would appear that we're actually offering more appointments now to patients in Oldham than we did under the previous schemes, and that the delivery centres are local because, of course, 7-day access service only operated out of the integrated care centre, whereas now we have 5 delivery points in each of the primary care networks in Oldham. Okay, so in month 1, which was October, 4 of our primary care networks delivered in excess of the required number of minutes that they had to do, and 1 was under. They have had some problems in respect of mobilisation. There's been a national problem around IT and patient records being visible to all the providers in the system. However, you know, that is a national problem with EMIS, the clinical system provider. So they have had to put workarounds in place to get around that as we wait for the system supplier to catch up and put the necessary IT solution in place. So again, really impressed that they managed to meet the go live date with those challenges. We have had some issues and risks around estate. Our North Primary Care Network and our West Primary Care Network wanted to deliver out of CHP Lift Company buildings. However, the costs were prohibitive in respect of the owners of those buildings, and therefore they have had to find alternative estate. However, work continues, led by Greater Manchester, to negotiate with the owners of the buildings and try and reduce those costs to a rate that is affordable for our primary care networks to operate out of that centre. However, luckily in the north, which is one of those areas, they have been able to work out of Royton, which is a new purpose-built building rather than Royton and Crompton. The solution in West is the South Chadderton old building, which geographically is in a good position as it's in the centre of the network, but the estate leaves a little to be desired. And so we would really like to be able to get them into Wearmouth and the purpose-built facility there. So we will continue to progress that with Greater Manchester. What we're also seeing now as a result of this change is a far greater variation in respect of what the primary care networks are offering. The old services used to focus primarily on GP acute appointments, but as you can see from the report, our primary care networks are now starting to diversify, and they are using the enhanced access time for paediatric specific clinics, for chronic disease catch-up, for cytology, for vaccinims, and they're really starting to broaden the offer, both in respect of workforce and the kinds of services that can be accessed out of GP core hours, which I think is a real positive for patients who, you know, not just be able to access acute care, but also be able to pre-book routine care at a weekend or in an evening at a time that suits them. So we're still in very early days of this scheme, and we recognise there's still work to be done. However, as I said at the start, they managed to mobilise by the 1st of October. Utilisation rates are good, and we will continue to work with them to improve that and to increase the range of services offered. More than happy to take any questions or comments about what I've said or more of the detail within the paper.
Anyone got any questions? Okay, I guess from my point of view, I always look at these type of things with sort of some interest, really. Members of the public don't give a monkeys about any of this. It's just meaningless bureaucracy to most of them. But there are some very, very real issues in all of this. Do we think, you know, so it strikes me that we've had basically we've had some kind of extended access type facility in the Royton Health and Wellbeing Centre for a long time. This kind of bureaucracy stuff has sort of changed that quite dramatically, and probably seen the withdrawal. I think people will have felt a withdrawal of service for a period of time whilst the PCN gets something in replacement of it back up. Do you think that's had any impact on the perception in that community about ability to get hold of a GP? It sort of feels that those two things might be connected.
It could have, in respect of the timing and some of the feedback that we're getting currently. I haven't had any direct comments in relation to that, but I think, you know, you could draw some parallels around the timing of this change and the feedback that we're currently getting from members of the public, because, you know, it is a change in how patients access services. Of course, networks had a choice, and I think it is, you know, as I highlighted before, 2 of our primary care networks have chosen to retain part of the provision and do it at practice level rather than centralise it. And they did that based on feedback from their populations in South and West, that actually what their patients wanted was more appointments with their own GP. Yeah, not to go to a centralised service. So I'm really happy that they did survey their patients in advance of starting this service, and they have responded to that in respect to service delivery. Equally, when you look at the mandated hours of the contract, some of our networks are operating outside of those, which is a variation we were allowed to approve and did, such as West Primary Care Network offering appointments early morning before 8 o'clock, because again, that their population said that's when they wanted to come in. So I think as we move forward, what I want to encourage our primary care networks to do is to continue that dialogue with their registered patients, to continue to survey them about when they want to access services and what kind of services they want to access in that enhanced period, and to respond to that and to deliver the services in accordance with that. And I think the more we do that, Mike, the more we will see that dialogue and that understanding change with the general public.
Okay, and then two last points for me. I think we need to start, as a comment really, this one. I think we need to start seeing a regular activity report against this stuff, where we can see some trends. So it's good it's all breaking down by each of the PCNs. It'd be good to see some of the key metrics that they've been judged against and which way they're going, so we can see it over time. And then when I look at Central in particular, almost 5% of DNA rates. That's kind of quite a lot more than everywhere else. And that,
Yes.
given that's the biggest PCN area, it's like 80,000 people. That's also a big number. And I know we're only just getting going. So what are we going to do to drive down the DNA rates in Central? Because that's quite an important thing. There's a lot of lost time for people. Nicola,
It is
you
a
can
lot.
wrap up.
It's a lot. Yeah, sorry, Nicola. It's a lot of lost time for clinicians, and it impacts, of course, on other patients who need to access the service being able to. And I think what's always surprising with this is, that when you break the DNAs down, you find a lot of DNAs are on the day the appointment was booked as well, which also really surprises me. I think for me, I know Nicola's got her hands up. Again, I think the communication with the general public and communication with registered lists about the importance of attendance and the importance of attending the right service at the right time is what we need to try and continue to address this problem, because they are appointments that other patients in the system need.
100%. Thank you, Nicola.
So it's off the back of that, and a point that I was going to make again, Charlotte, you hope you've seen the value of you being sat around this table, because it is about how we manage our population and our population health. When we start to map this just around the enhanced access DNA rate, we map that against general GP access DNA rates, then we map that against wider primary care DNAs, and then map that against our the patients and the primary need in which patients are presenting. We can map that then against dentistry and the issues that are happening there. We map that against A&E attendances, which are up significantly in comparison to, kind of 12 months ago and pre-pandemic, and then map that equally against DNA rates in outpatients for elective surgery. When you put that all back round, a lot of the people that are presenting and not attending appointments in primary care should or did not attend, should have attended and therefore did not attend outpatient appointments for elective, have presented back at A&E. This is about a fundamental broken system in the way people use it. So it is a great piece of work, Marion. It is great that we're starting to see some of this data. Our want for data, so this is about setting expectations of anybody watching the live stream, as well as ourselves as a committee. How we get the data and how that flows is very complicated, and how we map that, what our asks are, don't necessarily come through with the data in which is being collected, and that is a whole different piece of work that's going on outside. So I suppose what you're hearing from me, Mike, in my position in this committee is we are committed to getting that, because if we don't, our system will always seem broken. However, it is a support from the committee back into us as the teams to say we need this not just for it to be a primary care issue, but to be a wider system issue. That's from a GM as well as a locality point of view. Thanks.
Okay, I understood all of that. Makes sense. I kind of feel like I'm sort of flying an aeroplane with one arm behind my back and my blindfold on, and some pedals aren't quite working properly, and maybe there's only a bit of a wing that still needs to be built properly. I don't think it's right. When we look at sort of risks identified today, that can't just be on yours and Marion's shoulders, really. I think from today we need a fairly forcible letter to people like Matt Hennessy and the data team, making clear what our needs are to be effective for our population in terms of data and access from the GM team now. I think we could do with seeking some timelines off them and some guarantees about timelines, but it's unquestionable. We need to get to a place. And it was great that the Department of Health and Social Care, NHS Digital, whichever one that came up with it, actually published for the first time comparative patient access information earlier this week. That's a really good step forward. We need to put some pressure on GM to do the same for us in our locality, so we've got better data at our fingertips. And if that takes them a while to do, as long as it's on the radar and it's in the plan and we've got a timeline, then we can start to manage the timeline with some expectation. So the risk is we haven't got enough data. The action is we need to write to Matt Hennessy. If I could leave that with you, Nicola, and I'll kind of pick that up with you as well, that'd be really helpful. Anything else on this particular item for folks? Good report, Marion. It's off the ground. That's really good. People got more access to services than they've had previously in primary care, but the demand is insatiable still. So we need to see this growing and developing over time. Brilliant. That takes us to any other business from anybody as the last item. Thank you very much. At that point, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close and confirm our next meeting is currently scheduled for February. We reserve the right to bring it forward if we need to, depending on what happens with some of these engagement events during December with some practices. More than amenable to put another date on, Marion, if you need to early in the new year. With that, I thank you all for attending the very first meeting of this afternoon. It will get a bit easier, a bit better. More people will talk because there'll be more papers as we get into this. And I wish you all a very Merry Christmas. They're still playing Christmas tunes on the radio today, I saw. So I hope you have a wonderful time and see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.